In 1967, nearly 2 decades before the world watched the Challenger disaster unfold live on television, another space tragedy struck the heart of NASA, one that was equally horrifying, yet far less remembered. It didn't happen during a high-stakes mission or dramatic liftoff. It happened quietly on the ground, during what should have been a simple pre-launch test. The Apollo 1 disaster claimed the lives of 3 astronauts, Virgil Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee, who were trapped and burned alive inside their sealed spacecraft, just feet from rescue crews as flames engulfed their capsule in a matter of seconds. The fire erupted during a routine plugs-out test, where the spacecraft was supposed to operate independently of external power. What followed wasn't just an accident. It was the result of a catastrophic web of bureaucratic failure, engineering oversight, and pressure to meet political deadlines at all costs. These 3 astronauts didn't die because space is dangerous. They died because the people on the ground didn't listen. And in many ways, the Apollo 1 fire was worse than Challenger. Challenger's explosion was a public shock, a highly visible moment broadcast live to millions, creating an instant icon of tragedy. Apollo 1, on the other hand, was largely covered up, its legacy reduced to footnotes in aerospace textbooks and the occasional plaque. But without this disaster, the moon landing might have failed. Without these deaths, the Apollo program might have spiraled into failure. The fire was the price paid to make the spacecraft safe enough to carry men to the moon. Let's rewind. The mid-1960s were a frenzied time at NASA. With the Soviets winning early space races, Sputnik, Yuri Gagarin, America was desperate to take the lead. President Kennedy had promised a moon landing before the decade ended, and every division at NASA was under crushing pressure to deliver. Apollo was the name of that promise. But the spacecraft, especially the command module, was still riddled with problems. Gus Grissom, one of NASA's most respected astronauts, had voiced growing concern over the design and safety of the module. He famously hung a lemon on the simulator, an aviation term for a faulty machine, as a public protest. The cockpit was filled with over 34 miles of exposed wire, flammable Velcro, foam, and nylon netting, all placed inside an atmosphere of 100% pure oxygen. It was a time bomb. On January 27, 1967, during a routine pre-flight rehearsal, Grissom, White, and Chaffee climbed into the capsule. The test wasn't supposed to be risky. No fuel was loaded, and the rocket was nowhere near ignition. But then, just minutes into the test, something went wrong. A spark, likely from a faulty wire, ignited the oxygen-rich atmosphere. Within 17 seconds, the entire cabin was engulfed. The last words caught on transmission were, "We've got a fire in the cockpit," followed by agonized screams, and then silence. The design of the hatch made things even worse. It opened inward, which meant that under the expanding pressure caused by the fire, it became impossible to open. Rescue crews were just outside, listening helplessly. By the time they forced the hatch open, the inside of the capsule was melted, and the crew had perished in the flames. The official investigation found dozens of contributing factors, including poor workmanship, lack of quality control, a dangerously volatile environment inside the capsule, and NASA's culture of rushing deadlines. The tragedy was avoidable, and that's what makes it even harder to stomach. But in the wake of their deaths, something changed. NASA halted all manned missions for nearly 2 years. The Apollo spacecraft was redesigned from the inside out, with fireproof materials, an outward opening hatch, better wiring, and far more rigorous testing. The men of Apollo 1, Grissom, White, and Chaffee, became reluctant heroes, martyrs for the mission to the moon. The changes made after their deaths arguably saved the lives of the Apollo 11 crew. It's one of those moments in history that feels buried, too painful too bureaucratic, too technical to package for TV. But let's be clear, if Apollo 1 hadn't happened, Apollo 13 might have ended in tragedy. Without the fire, NASA's safety culture may never have developed. Yet, unlike Challenger or Columbia, there is no day of remembrance that enters the public consciousness. Few outside the space community know these names. There were no classroom watch parties, no national mourning, just silence. And maybe that silence is what makes it worse, because it wasn't an act of God or space's inherent danger. It was man-made, engineered by neglect. These men were not sacrificed for some unknown experiment. They were killed by an agency rushing too fast, cutting corners and ignoring the voices of its own astronauts. Grissom was one of the original Mercury 7. He flew in Gemini and was expected to lead the first lunar missions. White was the first American to walk in space. Chaffee was a rising star, a test pilot with a brilliant future. All three deserve better. All three trusted NASA to protect them. In the aftermath, their widows were left not only to mourn, but to carry the torch of accountability. They testified, they pushed for change, and they made sure that their husbands' names wouldn't be forgotten entirely. Still, it's strange how history works. We remember the fiery explosion of Challenger because it was public. We remember Columbia because of the haunting re-entry footage. But Apollo 1, a sealed capsule, a spark, and death in the dark. No footage, no explosion, just black smoke rising from a test pad. And yet, their loss changed everything. The Apollo program emerged stronger, smarter, safer. The path to the moon was paved not just with engineering marvels, but with the memories of three men who never got to see the stars. So the next time we celebrate spaceflight, remember that our greatest achievements are often built on the silent shoulders of those who paid the highest price. The fire of Apollo 1 may not have made headlines like Challenger or Columbia, but its heat burned deep into the fabric of NASA. It rewrote policies, it redefined leadership, and in a strange, painful way, it made the dream of the moon landing possible. What's truly haunting isn't just the tragedy, it's how easily it's been forgotten. And that's why we tell this story. So they're not just names etched in metal plaques. They are the reason we walk in space at all.